So I'm on twice today. Goodness, I'm a university chaplain these days in Oxford, and we have 8 weeks of term, and so that's 8 Sundays, and 5 of those are guest preachers, and one of them is my assistant chaplain. So I'm preaching today more times than I would preach in a term. So it feels like hard work. And I'm doing 2 very different things. This morning is very personal. It's kind of testimony, really. This evening is very Bible, very text-based. So I'm doing 2 completely different things today. Rob's asked me to come and speak about inclusion, and particularly LGBTQ inclusion in the church. That's what I'm going to do. And so, although when I was last here, which is a while back now, I used to stand here and often just preach with an open Bible and no notes, I've got text to preach from this morning because I want to make sure I'm accurate, and if anyone has got some recording device, that what I do is what I want to do, and nice and tight and accurate. So, sort of testimony, personal stuff this morning, lots of Bible, lots of text this evening. Do come back for something very different later on. Something else has changed in 10 years. Need glasses now. In the spring of 2003, I was invited to appear on the BBC TV show The Weakest Link. And a couple of mornings before the recording, I was walking the dog, and it occurred to me that Anne Robinson was likely to ask if I was gay. I was an unmarried vicar. It was a standard question she threw out in that typical mean, acerbic manner of the character she adopted to present the show. Of course, I am gay, but at the time, almost nobody knew. And as I thought about this, the fun of going to London to be on the quiz became completely overshadowed by the fear of what I would do if she asked this simple question. I mean, my family didn't know. My parish didn't know. I wasn't about to come out on national TV. I'd spent years hiding in plain sight so I could operate as an evangelical vicar and not come under suspicion. In 2003, general attitudes towards gay people hadn't quite yet become the supreme matter of orthodoxy that they've become since then. But still, it was simplest to answer the question, "Are you married?" with a quick, "Not yet," in order to deflect attention, and back then I was still young enough to get away with that answer. What would I do if I was asked a straight question on TV? I couldn't lie, so I wasn't going to say no. I walked through the woods with the dog that morning, getting increasingly anxious over a question I might never face. I got home and sat there silent and still, frightened of what might never happen. I spent a whole day thinking through 100 different options. I knew I was gay in my early teens. I knew I was gay at university. Actually, at university, I was invited to be on the Christian Union Exec, the committee, and when I was invited, I was asked if I was gay. I did lie that time. In my defense, I was 20 and desperate to fit in. It was, I guess, what I probably thought of as an aspirational answer. It was for sure a sinful question. I just wanted to serve Jesus. Why should who I fancy make any difference to that? I knew I was gay a few years later when I started to train to be a vicar at Wycliffe Hall in Oxford. And in my time there, I had a hell of a time as God, in his infinite kindness, made me really face up to the truth of who I was. Wycliffe was not an easy place to face up to that truth, and I sort of half got there. I'd edge towards seeing it, accepting it, and then hear a fellow student make some casual homophobic comment, and I'd run away from myself all over again. Yet God, in his mercy, wouldn't let me off the hook. And at the end of my time there, Dick France, who was principal at the college, called me into his study for stern words. I'd failed to do all sorts of things I should have done. I'd missed events and courses, and he was not going to commend me for ordination. In my shock, I knew I had the choice to be silent and watch my career disappear, or I could risk being honest with Dick and see what he did. So I told him. I've been coming to terms with being gay, and that's why I've missed things and been absent and been erratic. It's because I've been through emotional torment. No excuse, really sorry, there it is. Dick became one of my heroes and a lifelong friend that day. I was just another student there he saw go through that college. I don't think many, however, can have experienced the level of pastoral care I received from my college principal over the weeks that followed. Through ordination, in the years after, as I went from curate to vicar and onward, till I stood with really not enough others at Dick's funeral a decade ago. I just wanted to be a good vicar, a decent priest. Only as time passed, it suddenly became much harder. The church changed. It became hard to hide in plain sight. It became hard to be a gay man and an evangelical vicar. I used to go to leaders' meetings, support networks, conferences, new wine. And suddenly orthodoxy started to include Jesus and traditional views on sexuality. We changed. I had to develop this ability to appear to smile and agree with things I did not agree with, without actually agreeing with them. But I had to appear to. It mattered. It didn't when I was first ordained. It did now. I'd sit there thinking, do you see what I spend my life doing? I'm just like you. I work 12 hours a day, at least, growing a church. I see some folk transformed by the Spirit. I see some lives turned around. I see the love of Jesus touching people who had no idea. I see a town centre church that was teetering towards closure, now filled with a life whose identifying marks are worship and evangelism and compassion. And still you're asking me, why am I not married? Does it matter? The joke was, on the one hand, I was feeling the burn of suspicion from the new orthodoxy of my clergy friends. And on the other, within my parish, one bloke was absolutely sure I was after his wife. And my mum was every other month trying to marry me off to some new female parishioner. Eventually, I'm afraid it all became too much for me. I took a break from being a vicar because I couldn't cope. I needed to do again what I'd done at Wycliffe. I needed to come to terms with who I was. I needed to stop hiding in plain sight. I needed to be honest. I needed not to have a clever answer about my sexuality. I needed a simple one. I took a break from ministry because it felt like life was taking a break from me. I started by going to Kentucky for a month, which I accept isn't the obvious place for someone working through sexuality issues to find peace. I wasn't looking for peace, I was looking for Jesus. And a friend of mine at a seminary there offered me space, and it seemed like a good option. It was a terrific option. I had time with a remarkable Christian psychotherapist who helped me to see that over the years I'd simply accepted that as a gay man, I was a second-class Christian, indeed a second-class human being. Knowing the truth does set you free. Sometimes it takes somebody else to help you see the truth about yourself. I had that gift in Kentucky, and the freedom that followed was immense. There are no second-class human beings. None. I know the scriptures well enough to know this intellectually, but I had to be helped to see I'd taken on a terrible attitude and let it rule my life. And then I had to make sense of my life on the other side of that realization. I learned this. I was deeply, deeply broken. All that time I'd spent hiding in plain sight, I wasn't hidden. I was broken. Hiding, I was pretending. I may have fooled others, I mostly deceived myself. I'm not straight. That normality is strange to me. It cripples me. It is a lie. It does not fit. It damages me. I had to learn how to be truly me, faithfully, worshipfully, Christianly me. And before I could serve people and point them to Jesus, I had to stop, spend time with Jesus, and discover who the honest, not hiding, gay me was with him. Well, my life as a vicar in South Wales at this point was a bit of a whirlwind, but fortunately for me, we Anglicans have ways of dealing with whirlwinds. I phoned my archdeacon, and I received exemplary care from my archdeacon and my archbishop. They had no idea, absolutely no idea what I'd been going through. But the compassion, care, and ongoing protection they offered were superb. Emails, phone calls, visits. My archdeacon sometimes just sat there with me talking about music or films or anything, just to spend a little time with me and show that I wasn't alone when I was feeling very alone. There were days I was incredibly angry with the church for the twists in the journey I was experiencing, but it was the church, the people of God, that believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. It was the church that sheltered me through the storm, even if all I could see was the way the wind kept blowing inside and out. I stopped being a vicar. I took time to study the Bible. It's a commonplace that there's nothing in the Gospels about homosexuality, but let me say there's everything about how Jesus deals with people. I am not an issue, apologies, I'm a person, so actually I find an awful lot in the Gospels that hits the spot directly for me. And this is where being here becomes lovely. Because in the 2 years I spent not being a full-time clergyman, I came here. I was with you. I was well looked after by John and Michelle Walker at the end of John's ministry, last year of John's ministry. And by you, though some of you weren't here back then, and those of you who were mostly didn't know that's what you were doing for me. I didn't preach at all in my first year here. I just needed space. And when I did start to preach again, my second or third sermon was from today's gospel reading. And as I was preparing that talk, I took a journey with the director of the art gallery at the university where I was actually working. And we were going to view some things that might be displayed in the university art gallery. We travelled by train together. We chatted about all sorts of things. The gallery director told me of her plans for the weekend and asked me mine. I told her I was preaching at church. She was fascinated. She was really kind. We got on very well. She was also Jewish and asked me all sorts of questions about the talk. I gave her an outline of the sermon. I spoke of blind Bartimaeus, calling out to Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Throughout Mark's gospel, Jesus has kept who he is quiet, and now as they leave Jericho, others are telling the blind man to be quiet, but Jesus wants him to speak up. And then there's the wonderful question there, as Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? And the text gloriously adds, the blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. Sometimes salvation is the healing of things that have been wrong for a long time. Jesus is the first son of David, the first king in David's line for hundreds of years to be acclaimed as king in Jerusalem. The last king in David's line was Zedekiah. He escaped Nebuchadnezzar's armies at Jerusalem, ran and was captured at the plains of Jericho. Jericho, where Jesus now is. There Zedekiah was forced to watch as his sons were killed. And then at Jericho, Zedekiah was blinded. Now, Jesus hears a blind man cry out in Jericho and sees a chance to put right a long wrong. Zedekiah's and everyone's redemption is coming. And I said to my friend on the train, the question for the congregation from all that's going to be, what is your long wrong? Perhaps to help answer that, who are you deep inside? Who do you see yourself as being? The blind man? Perhaps, perhaps not. The lonely person. The bereaved. The guilty, the sinned against. The poor, the thoughtless. The friendless. The ignored. The abused. Who? Now, Bishop's discussions about queer people miss the mark repeatedly because they get caught up in issues and problems and above all in policing bedrooms. When civil equal marriage was passed in 2013, the Church of England bishops responded with a document tightening up what was and what was not acceptable bedroom behaviour. Sex. Gloriously, they published it on Valentine's Day 2014. And every time they do something like this, they forget to ask, what would Jesus do? No. What did Jesus do? Because every time Jesus meets a person in the Gospels, he treats them as a person, not an issue, not a problem, not something to be controlled, but someone to be loved and raised up, cherished and valued, given dignity and respect in exactly the same way as every other human being. That's what Jesus did and does. So take a moment. Think about being offered all of that. And think about who you are deep inside. And one more question. What do you want Jesus to do for you? Let me tell you a secret. We preachers, we preach to ourselves. And as I spoke those words all those years ago, I suddenly knew who I was. The gay man who is very much a priest. And my prayer added to that was, Lord, I want to be both, not either or. I want to serve. And that thought went through my mind on the train as I explained the sermon to my friend from work. And here, as I stood here in church the following Sunday and gave that sermon. And both times I was hit between the eyes by the love of Jesus. And as I heard again, the final verse of that Bible passage, "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. The following encounter was broadcast in the first round of The Weakest Link on BBC One during an afternoon of autumn 2003. Anne Robinson. So, Marcus. Me. Yes, Anne. Anne. You're 30-ish, single and a vicar. Me. That's right. Anne. Are you gay? A very audible intake of breath from the other contestants. Me. Pause. Smile. Why, Anne? Are you checking to see if I'm available? It took me a day of thinking and being afraid to come up with those 10 relaxed, off-the-cuff words. That's no way to live. And I'm glad the world I knew then seems a very, very long way away. Please hear this. Some things change, some things stay the same. Churches and chapels and universities and schools and every sort of place you can name are peppered with ordinary, normal people. There are no second-class human beings. Nobody needs to hide or live in fear or apologize for who they are. Whatever is going on in the church or the world, Jesus is constant. And you are precious beyond words. You are loved beyond understanding. And though sometimes things are left wrong for a very long time, we will all rise together. Oh, and because I know you're wondering, yes, I won.